June 1989, the Tiananmen Square protests, a student demonstration that shook the world and radically shaped the direction of the emergent relationship between China and the West. Less than a year after the controversial protests in Tiananmen, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, in conjunction with the Vancouver Society and Support for Democratic Movements, proposed to commemorate the bravery of the protesters by erecting a statue on the UBC campus. The proposal involved the construction of a Goddess of Democracy statue, a replica of a papier-mâché statue hoisted during the protests in Beijing. The goddess, then and now, speaks to the history of Chinese-Canadian relations, the meeting of East and West, and the creation of a new global culture of immigrants. Whatever the sculptor's original intention, his statue has taken on a range of meanings for a range of communities. This is the story of that statue and its sculptor, Chung. Little is publicly available about the details of Chung's life. He was born in Canton, China in 1946, 3 years prior to the completion of China's Communist Revolution. As a resident of Hong Kong, however, he did not directly experience the effect of the new People's Republic. In his 20s, Chung attended Chu-Hai University to study civil engineering, and in 1969, at the age of 23, he moved to Canada to study at the Vancouver School of Art. As a resident of Vancouver, he built a range of memorable public monuments, including the somewhat controversial Gate to the Northwest Passage, which sits to this day in Vanier Park. In 1991, likely as part of his involvement with the Chinese Cultural Center, he created a radical departure from his previous minimalist works, the Goddess of Democracy.
The original intention, as far as I know from those people who involved in the replica making, not in Canada, in the US, I know a few of them. The intention was to establish a dialogue, to encourage democracy to continue in China, or pursuit of democracy to continue in China. But in the end, it fell into a crack, unfortunately, because people from mainland China who experienced the democracy movement, there are so much pain, so much hard memories. People like me, I can't stand to see these replicas. I find it hurt. It's funny for you to make this. And do you begin to understand what it takes to be there in the square, to risk everything? Lots of people really lost their jobs, their status and lives, limbs, in order to just say, we want a democracy for China. And here you put there is it to commemorate this painful, failed student movement, or to celebrate what you already have been enjoyed for hundreds of years?
Well, I was on the committee that accepted the statue. In my memory, and all this is probably in the file, the statue was offered to the Alma Mater Society, but they required the permission of the university to install it. And it went from the president's office, then David Strangway, to our committee, which was the University Art Committee. And we knew, I don't know how we knew, we must have been told by the president's office, that the Chinese consul had told the university that they didn't want us to accept this statue, and that it would be an insult, etc., 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 etc.
But very recently, I have learned that the Vancouver Society in Support for Democratic Movement is plotting with a small group of Chinese students to erect a so-called Goddess of Democracy in your beautiful university. They claimed it would be the first statue ever erected at a university in North America. However, the plot has met opposition from some corners of UBC and the Chinese community, and not to say many Chinese students. In such circumstances, the attempted installation of statue is not only an act of interfering into China's internal affairs and of hostility towards the Chinese people, but also an act which goes against the world trend.
So the Goddess of Democracy was present and played a role at Tiananmen Square, and is kind of an icon of the aspirations of the demonstrators at Tiananmen Square. So I would say it's a highly political object.
the Chinese community divided over the placement of the statue in Chinatown.
We have so many different Chinese communities. There is a community from Taiwan. There is a community from mainland China. There is a community from Hong Kong. There is a community from old generation, many generations here, Chinatown people. And they don't necessarily easily communicate with each other. And the least active community is the community from mainland China. And now you have this, you look back, what is the intention? The dialogue did not create, but instead there is a gap, there is some kind of rupture, actually split this, after 1989, split the relationship between the older immigrants and the newer immigrants. This becomes a landmark. Look, we are different from you. You really come from this hardcore communist country. We're from Taiwan, we're from Hong Kong, we're different. The opposition was from Hong Kong and the Taiwan community would be that they don't want this statue to represent where they came from. People from mainland, number one, they don't have a say in Chinatown. Number two, it's too painful to face it. And there is another group who are always under a very subdued facade. These people may have enjoyed benefit from communist society, and they probably have seen through the society. They choose to live in this society, and they don't feel so proud of their identities in China. They choose to hide, to live under the assume a different identity.
I remember that in the 60s and 70s, while Mao Zedong was alive, the Chinese community in Vancouver was divided between people who had some sort of affiliation with mainland China and wanted to maintain that, and other people whose connections were Taiwan and Hong Kong and were anti-communist. So there was a pro-communist and an anti-communist elements in the Chinese community, and one or other dominated various organizations.
And those people definitely don't want to see this statue. And I can see clear reasons why Chinatown wouldn't want this. I wouldn't want this to erect in front of my door. What does that mean for me? To bring back my heart memory, to show that I belong to the government this statue was opposing, or this has nothing to do with me. I'm from Hong Kong.
As a result of opposition in Chinatown, the statue ended up at the University of British Columbia, where it remains just as divisive for Chinese communities in Vancouver. Whatever Alan Chung Hung's original intention, his statue continues to speak to a range of immigrant issues. In 1997, the statue became a centerpiece in a local protest against the Asian Pacific Economic Conference. Though the protests stayed local, their impact restarted a global dialogue about the values and meaning of democracy, a dialogue initiated in Beijing in 1989. How the goddess of democracy will be used in the future remains to be decided. Even so, it is certain that Chung Hung's statue will remain relevant in a globalized world of cultural contact between East and West.